truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths. We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Since 9/11, the special operations community has largely come out of the shadows and more into view of the American public. The Green Berets who rode horses into Afghanistan and called in precision airstrikes, the raid on Osama bin Laden, Pakistan's compound, or the Baghdadi kill were high points in special operators making the news. But the work of special operations isn't always that big, and it isn't always direct action. Green Berets, like today's guests, were built to train indigenous forces and partner closely with foreign militaries. The community at large and by component is very tightly knit. We look out for each other on the battlefield and when we get back home. My guest today is Daniel Elkins, a Green Beret and founder of Special Operations Association of America. Daniel, thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me.
So, what is the Special Operations Association of America? Let's just start there. Nonprofit, does some really cool stuff. What are you guys up to?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're the only nonprofit in the United States that solely advocates for the men and women of this community currently serving and those that previously served. And, we serve as a voice of that community to the powers of being. And we've been doing that for the last 3 years.
Oh, awesome. Okay. And before that, there wasn't like a specific sort of advocacy group. Is this advocacy to Congress, advocacy for policy, kind of like a lot of the VSOs that are in service organizations that we see everywhere?
It was kind of started in the shadows, if you will, of me working at various VSOs or veteran service organizations within DC. And, since 2014, I've seen this preponderance of effort getting shifted from, conventional units to special operations. And we've moved into irregular, unconventional, and asymmetric warfare. And as that shift started to happen, you would think that there'd be a trend in advocacy for that population that was actually doing the work. And I didn't really see that. And really noticed that there was a huge gap and no one was advocating for this community, mainly because, as you know, this community is not one to raise its hand and say, I need help. We just do it and don't ever ask for any accolades.
Yeah. Okay. Well, give me your history then. So when were you active duty, and then when did you move into the VSO world?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am still in the National Guard. I'm still on a team, still serving proudly. But in my M-Day status as a citizen soldier, I've spent the better part of 2 decades on Capitol Hill. Started years ago at the VFW, kind of bopped around, made my way up to legislative director, then an executive director, and that's about the time when I really realized that this need was pretty vast. And we started about 2.5 years ago.
Real good for you. And so when did you join the Army?
I joined the Army in 2010. Infantry. I was a LRS guy, a long-range recon guy, and saw the grass was greener on the other side. So I went to selection in 2012.
Awesome. Okay, so the association then, it's an advocacy group. How big are you guys now?
Yeah, we have around 30,000 members right now, and we really do 4 distinct things. Advocacy, everybody understands. That's what traditional VSOs do, or MSOs do, military service organizations. So that's the first leg of the table. The other 3 are kind of unique. The second one is national security and policy advisement. So we believe that it's important to get operators with dirt under their fingernails that have the ground truth and elevate their voices to the highest levels of government, whether that be elected officials, people in the IC, people at the Pentagon, to give them an alternative view in the same way you would get from a special interest or a subject matter expert at a think tank. Except we're able to facilitate those types of conversations behind closed doors, and if need be, in classified spaces, because we have security clearances that can be validated. So that's the second leg of the table. The third, we believe in closing the military-civilian divide. So we do that through storytelling. The men and women, as you know, of this community do amazing things in and out of uniform and on and off the battlefield. And we fundamentally believe it's important to highlight that so we can continue to build that trust with the American people. And then last but definitely not least is our Overseas Allies program. So we fundamentally believe in America first, but not America only, because we know that more of our population and community would be in Arlington National Cemetery today if it wasn't for our overseas allies. So we serve all of those different capacities.
Okay, yeah, so let's dive into that last one, because that sounds cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, I say it all the time, America first doesn't mean let China and Russia do whatever they want. That's a weird interpretation of America first. But it seems like that's some people's preference. No, America first means we actually do have to lead. You know, peace through strength has to mean something that, and you can't just be like, well, I'm for peace, right, without the strength part. Oh, good for you. Get off your moral high horse. You got to have the strength part, and part of having that strength, it comes through keeping promises to allies. And so you guys were working a lot in Afghanistan during the botched withdrawal, and everybody throwing in and saying, like, we'll help whoever we can. And I'm assuming you guys are doing the same thing everybody else was doing. It's like, recontact whoever you know, try to direct them towards some sort of safety, right?
We were one of 3 organizations that was able to put a team on the ground in the region to actually aid in the evacuation efforts. So, we saw kind of the writing on the wall and pre-staged a team that was able to go in, and we did med caps in Doha, and then retrograded back to Germany, and did a lot of cultural sensitivity training, and then continued that effort last fall. We ran a network of 15 to 20 safe houses, chartered a couple more aircraft, and all in all, we were able to kind of move the needle to the tune of about 6,000, of which 400 to 500 were blue passport holders.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. And so, I want to try to translate some of what you just said. So, first, the cultural sensitivity training. So you're like training Afghans to like basic American culture. Is that what you mean by that? Yeah,
it will actually both ways. So one of the things that we noticed right away when we got to the camps at the lily pad sites where people were being processed was that the privates and the airmen that were engaging with this population, they had never been deployed to Afghanistan and did not understand anything about tribal culture, how to work with the elders. They were just disseminating information as if they were here in the United States, working in the military. So we very quickly realized as we were walking through the camps, non-standard, beards, baseball caps, and the elders were coming up to us and literally saying, we only want to speak with you. So we were able to then do some training, not only to the military and State Department assets on the ground who are trying to aid these people, but also start to do some training for the assimilation process even before they got to America.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, in America, you're all, it doesn't work that way. That is really interesting. And it's something a lot, I'm sure, at the higher levels and nobody thinks about, right?
That was the thing, right? We have to be honest, right? Like you're from the same community I am, just a different tribe. You're Navy, I'm Army, but we do thorough AARs after every mission, right? And I think the only way to always be improving is to take a really good look at what went wrong, and that's where I feel like there's some amnesia right now. Like we tend to continue to over and over forget these things when they go wrong, and that's unfortunate. So the disconnect between the strategic and the tactical level, we witnessed that on the ground in the first 35 minutes we were there.
Yeah. Well, it's a longer story, right? About what went wrong. In the end, it's my point is always if you decide to take everyone out, there's no way to make that right. It's impossible to do that correctly because it's no matter what, it's all imploding onto a single point, whether that point is Bagram or whether that point is Kabul. Kabul's a worse choice, of course, but in the end, it's kind of the same because you have to have a last American on a plane.
Right.
And there's nobody in the tower clearing them for takeoff.
No.
So how do you think that was? It's always going to work out that way. That's why I tell people, I'm like, we shouldn't have, the typical kind of right-wing response is we had to get out, but not this way. Well, I'm like, well, then what way?
How was it going to work?
Tell me how then.
Yeah.
And honestly, you should be happy that it collapsed so quickly, because let's go through another possibility here. Let's say it didn't collapse that quickly. Let's say that we got out and everything was fine. And it was like, oh, wow. Like the people in the tower were the Afghans, like our allies, the Afghan government being like, okay, bye, America. We're good. Well, let's imagine that. Let's imagine that scenario for a second. Of course, that's not what happened, but let's imagine it. You still have all of these Americans still in Afghanistan. They think everything's fine. But you have all of our allies is still in Afghanistan thinking everything's fine. And the Taliban waits them out a little bit. And then 6 months later, then they come through. You know how many Americans we would have saved? 0. We would have saved 0 people. So there is no scenario in which this works out well. There's no scenario. And that's why I tell people, there was no scenario where going down to 0 troops worked out well. It either got the way it was, or it went even worse, which is the scenario I just described.
I mean, I think it's all in its name, right? It was an evacuation. It's that's never a good thing.
Evacuations create vacuums. It's there's no connection between those words. and so, yeah. Oh, okay. Well, but I want to ask you a couple of more questions, but going back to translating what you said is what you guys are doing there, establishing safe houses. So can you tell us how, because I think common citizens hear that a lot from a lot of groups like yours, and they're like, okay, safe. I mean, I think I know what a safe house is, but how did you actually get them?
So that's a really good delineation, because most people, when they use the term safe house, they think lots of different things, and some may be more accurate than others, right? Most of the people in the evacuation efforts were using the word safe house to mean kind of like a hostel where there was 30 people staying and everyone knew where that location was. We were using it more in the traditional sense, where it was an unknown location. Very few people were going in and out of it. Once people went in, they didn't leave unless we went through an elaborate process from point A to point B. And how we were able to set those up was through the association and the contacts that people have served with. We were very close with some of the NDS, as well as some
NDS
the national, basically their Secret Service.
Okay.
Yeah. And as well as a few individuals from their special mission units, similar to what most people listening would know as Delta Force or SEAL Team 6. So very highly elite trained counter-terrorist units, as well as people who were very, very good at doing low visibility surveillance, and we were able to set these houses up through these surrogates. And then when people reached the threshold of being targeted, right? Not, oh, I'm scared. I mean, most people in Afghanistan during that period of time were scared, but some were actually being sophisticatedly hunted. And those are the ones whom we were helping and aid, right? So we kept about 10 in a house at a time. We moved them regularly, and we provided food, medical assistance, in shelter, and I'm very, very proud of that work we did alongside of our partners.
Yeah, I mean, and how do you even get some of those supplies into some of these areas? It just, again, through other surrogates who aren't being hunted necessarily as... Yeah,
absolutely.
It requires quite the network.
Oh, I mean, the logistical piece, and I think that this is something that, every branch of our special operations community brings a tool to, the fight that's very unique. One of the things that I think is very unique to special forces specifically, is our ability to, understand logistical supply chains and non-standard networks, right? And by, with, and through, right? We are a force multiplier, and we do that through making relationships and really having those relationships be genuine. So when we need something, we're able to leverage those relationships to help. And that's what we had to do. So we went through all the legal, IFAC, protocols and ensured that we were sending money to people that were okay to send money to. And then once that money was on the ground in the hands of, our handlers, they went out and procured food on the market and doctors and things of that nature.
Well, that's good. Maybe it sounds like the record keeping got a little bit better after I left, because I remember showing up and this is maybe a conversation for a different classification level, but the record keeping was not good. And it felt like, and this was a problem with both wars over the course of much time. Platoons or teams would go, and then the knowledge was not passed down to the next guys. Maybe because it was just so kinetic too at a certain point, and at a certain point in the war, when it gets less kinetic, maybe people started paying attention to those kind of networks and how important those relationships were. Because I feel like it was hit or miss when I was there, and there was turnover too. I mean, it was at the height of Obama's surge that I was there, and then everybody knowing that those were going to be all gone later, so nobody cared about keeping those relationships. It's like, and they didn't, and the Afghans didn't care about us either. It's just, it goes to show how flawed policy from the top can affect tactical situations. It's not, reinforces bad habits. And
that's one of the reasons why I wanted to start this organization, right? It was very, very personal to me on my Afghan trip, 16 and 17. So it was the last few months of Obama and the first few months of Trump. And I saw the pendulum swing so far from one side to another. And I saw our whole CT counterterrorism posture change so much, where I was just shocked. Like, how could it, like, I get some shift, but like it was like a night and day difference. And then on the backside of that, when we came home, very, very personal to me, one of my friends who I went through the Q course with, we deployed immediately to Afghanistan together. He raised his hand and was like, I need some help. And I watched him walk down a road, and I walked shoulder to shoulder with him, where, he became suicidal, and it was really, really rough. And when I looked at all the different organizations that are representing veterans, he didn't feel comfortable going into a Legion post where someone was there that had never deployed and spent 20 years at Minot. And I'm not saying they're second-class citizens. I value everyone who chose to serve, but people in the special operations community did it twice. So.
Yeah, and you got to have some common ground if somebody's going to understand what you're dealing with. Okay, let's shift AOs then, because you've been in Ukraine for the last few months.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's up there.
Yeah, well, so I was in Ukraine from 2019 and 20. I worked out of the embassy there while I was on orders. Yeah. So developed a deep love for the country, the people, and also really established some deep relationships and understanding of some of the inner workings of the political dynamic there, some of the cultural dynamics there. And my job when I was there overlapped essentially being in charge of or helping facilitate military equipment coming in and out of the country. So I knew all the people, the brokers, the people at the airport, all the trucking people. So when I was in my civilian status, when the invasion first happened, I knew that our organization could make a difference. So we've been back 5 times. The most recent time was the month of October, but we were there April, May, and there August, and then 2 trips in October. So
wow, that's good to know, because I went in May, and there was very few Americans there. They just reopened the embassy, and the first thing I thought was like, you need a group of military guys, kind of like middle management types, not too high up, because then they're not really problem solvers, but that sort of middle management, sort of senior enlisted, 04, 05 types that can be here on the ground to also make sure that, I know that the head of our military and the head of their defense, whatever they call it, talks regularly every week, but that's probably a translated conversation, very high level. Look, it does seem to work out okay from what I can gather. I mean, the effects on the battlefield are obviously positive. But I was like, man, it would really help if there was just an extra presence there.
Yeah,
and we don't have it still, to my knowledge. Maybe except for civilians, really, like you.
Correct. Yeah, and I mean that's one of the chasms, if you will, that we try and fill, right? It's to bring that knowledge back to, the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Armed Services Committee, individual members that actually deeply care about this. What we were doing there in October, I think would be very fascinating for some of your listeners, right? So we went over because, there's a school of thought that suggests that all this money is being wasted.
Oh, yeah.
There's huge levels of corruption and, why are we sending money over to them, right? So I was like, okay, let's take a really, exhaustive look at this process. Let's set up meetings. Let's go to, some of the frontline units and see how they're handling equipment, right? And what I found was something that was fascinating, right? So, we've accounted, I think it's like 5% of this year's DoD budget, which ROI that we've gotten on that, I think it's a roughly 50% of Russian military hardware has been destroyed in 9 months. So that alone is a pretty good ROI. Yeah. But I did find a bifurcated system, if you will, within corruption, right? So you have the humanitarian side of the house, and then you have the military aid side of the house. And, unfortunately, it's my belief, based on what I've seen, that, if you're at 7-Eleven and you round up your dollar, there is a highly likelihood that part of that is going to, not get to where you ultimately hoped it would.
Like these nonprofits, because they have no real way to assure that it's going to the right place.
It's all about last mile delivery, right?
Yeah.
Right. So getting it into Ukraine, absolutely. So then it gets into Lviv. So does it get all the way out to the east?
And what is it though? Is it like food supplies, or is it money?
Medical supplies.
It's not like cash is going. It's not just pallet. There's no pallets of cash.
No, it's not like Afghanistan or Iraq in the beginning. No. I didn't see any of that. But conversely, we audited the supply chain process for heavy weapons like Stingers, javelins, and what I found was a process that seemed overly robust, almost to the point where it theoretically could get in the way of military operations.
Well, there was like. What was it? Did we say hundreds or at least tens of pages of oversight requirements on the original Ukraine aid bill? I mean, there's some mythology out there that we have no idea where it's going, and people just kind of say it.
Right.
But why do you think that? They're like, we don't know where it's going. I'm like, even in the very public statements, it says line by line, where the money goes. And it's. And a lot of this military equipment is not exactly your first choice to steal if you're a gangster or something.
Right.
Somebody just kind of now random humanitarian aid and maybe right, because then they can go and then kind of resell that stuff, I suppose. Yeah, so you're going to see your requisite amount of problems there. I would guess, just like you might anywhere. That's the thing. It's are they more corrupt than us? Because I know a lot of people who shouldn't have gotten PPP loans, and they did.
So, I mean, when it comes to military equipment specifically, because that's the ground truth we wanted to uncover, I found that the frontline units that were using, javelins or Stingers were taking pictures of those tubes and sending them up the chain. And then they'd have to return the tubes to get a new munition, right? So, to me, I think this notion that they're being sold on the black market,
there's zero evidence of that.
It's ridiculous, and so then I dug in and wanted to know, okay, well, where is this narrative originating from? So we ended up meeting with the head of their cyber command, right? And we tracked the IP traffic, and I'll give you one guess where it's being amplified from.
Either Tucker Carlson or Russia.
Well, Russia. It is absolutely absolutely being amplified by the Russian government, and we watch the IP traffic, and so I firmly believe that between any communication problem with Ukraine and the United States, there is a Russian actor that's amplifying that to make it more negative and try and curb any sort of support that we're sending the country.
It's been unfortunate and very strange to watch our own politics and how people like just hook, line, and sinker take in that Russia propaganda. And I'm like, look, there's good arguments and there's bad arguments. There's good arguments to be, skeptical about Ukraine aid. Some people are genuinely worried about escalation. Now, they're wrong, and they've been proven wrong over the course of many months.
Right.
But it's a genuine worry with any conflict, right? There's a genuine question to be asked of like, well, why can't we fix our border too? Now to me, that's a false choice, but it's a genuine question.
Right.
It's a question we should certainly be asking. But it's not like, oh, we shouldn't do this one because we're not doing this one.
Right. Absolutely.
We should do both. That would be the proper argument.
And I mean, look at who's supporting Ukraine, right? Like, look at the regimes, right? This is not about Ukraine. This is about democracy and freedom versus tyranny. Yeah. Iran, the Shahed drones. I mean, that regime is, suppressing hundreds of thousands of people. China is supporting Russia. North Korea is supporting Russia. I mean, the notion that Putin is our friend is the most ridiculous proposition.
It's a weird one.
It's
a weird
very,
one.
very bizarre.
It's been a bizarre kind of turn of political events where sort of like the populist right, and I won't call them conservative because there's nothing conservative about that wing. There's a difference between far right populists and conservatives, a big difference. But they're much more similar in my mind to like your typical kind of 60s radical Vietnam protester. Like the mindset is the same. Everything America does is bad. We provoke everyone else. Putin's a victim, or pick your enemy. They're just victims of our policies. The terrorists only attacked us because of our policies. And I'm like, I always kind of go through that with people too on Osama bin Laden and 9/11. I'm like, what is it we did to him exactly? Was it all the help we gave him in the 1980s? Was it helping him beat the Russians when they were invading his country? Was that why he hates us? Yeah. Was it us? He's from Saudi Arabia. Was it us defending Saudi Arabia from Saddam Hussein in the early 90s? And then what did we do to this person?
Right.
Nothing. We did nothing to this person. He hates us because he hates us because we're not, Orthodox Islam. Like that's the only reason he hates us. You guys got to wrap your minds around that. Putin does this because he's an imperialist, and he will not stop, and he wants to create that chaos. He has a different set of incentives that you don't understand, and this is the problem that people just don't get. Like they think that he is thinking like them in a way, like a Western mind, and he's just not.
Well, I mean, I think some of your listeners will find this fascinating, right? Talk about different mindsets. In the American military, we have something called the doctrine of double effect, right? Which prohibits, rightfully so, targeting civilian or non-combatants in combat. Per Russian military doctrine, there's no delineation between civilian and a military target, right? Think Grozny, what did they do to get at the few thousand Chechen rebels, in the 90s, right? They surrounded the whole city and they reduced the whole thing. They murdered nearly 100,000 people because they didn't have any sort of delineation between the two. So
totally different mindset.
Let that mindset think in, right? We can't even comprehend something like that based on our ethics and how we've been trained, and that's just not who we're fighting. That's not who the Ukrainians are fighting.
No, it's totally different. It's hard to get people to understand that, right? The Russians are very much highly nationalist, highly tribal. It's still unclear to me how much of the Russian population still supports this, but it might be more than people think. When I see crazy approval ratings for Putin, those weren't fake. They might be now. I'm not sure, but they weren't fake. I took a cruise 8 years ago or so, maybe more. Back when it was still okay to kind of go to the Baltics. But it went to St. Petersburg, and I'll never forget.
What was that trip like?
It was super cool. It was just a tourist trip. Like it was just kind of complicated because, like, as an American, you can't really. It's hard to get a visa. But this was a while ago, so you know, relations were kind of okay, I guess, at the time. But I'll just never forget the tourist trinkets that were being sold. Imagine like all like, you know, like the funny, like kind of pro-Trump, like bobbleheads and stuff you can buy.
Yeah.
But they're funny. Like we like, you know, we buy them, but it's kind of, it's ironic. Like we're being kind of funny about it, or like
some humor in
like
it.
the American AF like stuff where it's like Lincoln with a machine gun, like riding a raptor.
It makes me smile every time I see it.
Yeah, there's like kind of a cultural funniness about it. So they have all that same stuff kind of around Putin, but it's not funny. It's like, no, it's like some of this mug. It's like a mug with like Putin like walking forward with his like bow tie undone, like he's coming out of, I don't know, like some whatever, like gala, but he's flanked by all these like Russian special operations. He has a halo around his head, and it's like that's just the mug. It's just like I was like wild. There was no irony to it at all. It was like, no, we just really love this guy. Like it was really weird.
I mean, and then you think about the propaganda, right? Like, so while I was in this previous trip in October, you know, we actually had some of the Ukrainians who were working alongside that had family that was in Kharkiv and ended up on the Russian side, and they were literally giving us phone messages because we wanted to know, like, what are the Russians thinking right now? What's the general consensus? And still, you know, 9 months later, there is a decent amount of people who believe it's all made up. They literally just don't believe what is happening. They think it's made up.
Yeah, like they don't believe there's a war.
Correct.
Or nothing.
Yeah, or they believe that the Ukrainians are doing it to themselves, which is absolutely preposterous.
It's not. Well, it's kind of like how many people in China, like our age, know about Tiananmen Square. There's like it's actually kind of a weird. They don't really know.
Weird. Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, and so the politics are on side too. Like there's hopefully a smaller and smaller faction, but there's definitely people who are believing this stuff. Like, and I think it's just for the sake of contrarianism. Honestly, as I've tried to explain, like why some people have fallen for this. I think COVID. Policies may have like broken them to an extent. Like if the establishment's saying something, it must not be true. And I'm like, well, you still got to use your brain. Like sometimes it is true. Well, you know, look, a lot of what they said during COVID was BS, but that doesn't mean this is all. It doesn't therefore mean that everything that somebody's saying is BS.
Well, in the fifth principle of patrolling is common sense, right? Like, does it have to pass the common sense test? And I think that, you know, like one of the things that I value so much about people that come from the special operations community is it forces people to think. It forces people to really evaluate a situation and try and think strategically or asymmetrically outside of, okay, this isn't working every time.
And objectively.
Right.
Like objectively. And this is with proper analysis, you know, and you just don't see a lot of that in politics and political conversations these days.
Well, I'm not a politician, but that's unfortunate because I feel like when you have that, it allows for healthy discussion of ideas. You know, like, I mean, you've been in the same team room that I've been in, where, like, you know, the one guy's like, no, I think it should be this way, and the other guy's, no, you're wrong, and this is what. And you hash it out, and it makes you debate, better.
And you debate like properly because it's not a partisan debate, right?
No,
it's not like a biased debate. It's like, no, we all know like nobody wants to get the other guy killed,
right?
You know, and so it's by necessity a very objective conversation, maybe heated, right? Like, but. You know, maybe with some insults hurled, like, I don't know.
Often impassioned.
Right.
Very much so.
But it's fact driven. It always has to be fact driven because we've had many of those discussions about like, hey, what do we need on this op? Like, who should we bring? Like, because you can only bring so many because we're on most of the time. You're like, this is kind of dumb, but we had like very specific ratios of like how many Americans you could bring versus how many Afghans or Iraqis you could bring. So, you have a lot of these conversations about like what resources you bring out, what your plan is. Do you land here? Do you walk there? What do you do? Like there's so many different options and things to debate. And this is one thing I note about veterans in Congress more generally, and I'd say more so with special operations, certainly not everybody. There's exceptions to the rule, always. But learning that pretty fast. But for the most part, because it's always the question, like, we should have more veterans in Congress. And I'm like, why? I was like, yeah, I mean, reactively, I'm like, yeah, we should. That experience seems to be a good one for policymaking. But actually, over the last year or so, I've come to a different conclusion as to why it's a good thing. It's for that reason. It's because in the military, there's a lot more, it's not as stringent as people think from the outside, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot more internal debate than you realize. There's a lot more like outside the box thinking and courage, especially in the special operations community. And I find that veterans up here on the left and the right tend to be, at the very least, even if they won't come to the conclusions I think they should come to, at the very least, they at least try to have some form of reasoning for why they came to a conclusion that they came to. And that's really important. Because I see all too often people coming to political conclusions with like
zero information.
Yeah, and zero information. And like, I'm like, well, why do you believe that? And it's like they give you some soundbite answer.
Right.
And I'm like, that's it? That's the... Okay, come on.
Yeah, and I mean, but like, look at the stakes, right? Like, how much research would you do on a topic if you knew that if you got it wrong, you could be killed, right? Right. Like let's put it in context, right? And I think that that is one of the reasons why, at least the members who I know, like yourself, that come from this community, right? Like they approach it a different way, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on. Like our association is, through and through down the middle, right? We're nonpartisan, but we firmly believe in, prioritizing the warfighter, because if you don't, people die, right? And I think that's what you're talking about. It's that attention to detail. It's that drive to like really understand the problem set, because the stakes are really high and the margins are narrow.
Yeah, and that's why we need some more. I think some more backup. Maybe that'll be your next thing, dude. Maybe one for Congress. Quite the resume. I don't think. I don't know if the Washington D.C. Where are you from originally?
I grew up in Maryland. Yeah, actually, right outside
Maryland.
of Annapolis. You guys heard it here first.
My wife
Crenshaw is asking me to run for Congress
over there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's a lot of. That's
It's a great area.
Yeah, that's a really nice area. I love Annapolis. Now I was rejected from the Naval Academy, and I'll put that on the air, and so yeah. So Army Navy games are always on my. I'm still cheering for Navy. I'm just
go
saying,
Army beat Navy. Little round of applause there. It was a good day on Saturday.
Yeah, it was a good game.
It was a great game.
I was there actually.
Okay,
it was cold.
Yeah, it was definitely cold.
It was a good game. I heard that was the first time in history they've gone to overtime.
That's what I heard too. Yeah.
That was pretty cool.
And
then they both scored a touchdown. It was like finally some action. Like they both scored a touchdown, and then like I think they both
converted in the first overtime.
Yeah, it was the third round. It's weird. It's like college football, man. I don't, it's like penalty kicks almost. To put it in soccer terms, which is my sport, but now everybody's judging me. Whatever.
Oh, I'm judging you right now.
Awesome. No. Whatever. It's awesome.
I'm just kidding.
It's the world's sport. Well, actually, one thing I wanted to go back to with you is Ukraine corruption, because it really is such a political hot topic. So I want to get drive some more fact finding on that, and because it's worth noting, like Ukraine is corrupt, like as a general, as we would assess it by its metrics from a Western standpoint. So is, but here's the thing, here's the context, right? Like, so is every single Soviet bloc country, because the Soviet Union was an unbelievably corrupt place, right? And you look at Putin's history and how he rose to power, and from the KGB, where the KGB had all these like spheres of influence, then lost it in the 90s, and how he was able to rise to power by basically taking from the oligarchs, demanding 50%, basically creating this sort of mob state where like, we won't arrest you, but you got to give us 50%, and then enriching his fellow KGB guys, and then like asserting some serious power as a result, becoming what many believe is the richest man in the world. Like, that corruption comes from the Russian culture, you know, and you can root it out, but it does take a generation or two. Like it's not immediate. And so, you know, this is the question I think American foreign policy always has, you know, like how high and mighty are we going to be when we're dealing with another country, like whether it's Saudi Arabia and their human rights issues or whoever it's going to be, or are we going to be kind of, you know, a little bit more realistic about how the world is, like, and try to get them to a better point? Because, like, you know, you push them away, they're going to go back to a different state than we'd like them to be in. Well,
so to me, I look at, like, we talk about ROI, right? Like, you know, is the military corrupt? We didn't see any evidence of that. Are there corrupt people? Yeah, there's corrupt people everywhere, you know, but like I look at the bigger picture, like compared to the $300 million we spent a month for 20 years, you know, how did we move the needle there? You know, like the last time I checked, the Ukrainians are doing a really good job.
Yeah. It's obviously working. If it wasn't working, we might have to look at some things, right? Right. It's like, actually, and one of the first people I met on the ground when I got there was like Tim Kennedy. I was like, Tim Kennedy? He's in the lobby of my hotel. I was like, "What's up, man?" We'd never met before, but like
Tim's a great guy.
We know of each other.
I'm on the board of Save Our Allies.
Yeah, that's what he was working with. Yeah, and so they're doing some really interesting stuff. And I was like, "Hey, man, like no shit. Like what is the deal?"
Yeah,
because like everybody's worried about it. Clearly, there's like a kind of an organized crime presence that's just pervasive in Eastern Europe. It is what it's a cultural element that you can't just root out overnight. So like, what's the deal? And he's like, the deal is, for the most part, it's like a ceasefire. It's like be corrupted every other way, but not this one. Everybody's like very united when it comes to, if this is for the fight.
For the fight, exactly.
Then you don't mess with it.
Tim, man.
And that was the explanation to me. And I like that's from some, because I'm not asking Ukrainians this question,
right?
Because I know what answer they're going to give me,
right? Of course,
right. But so I wanted to ask like a fellow spec ops guy, like, what's the deal? And that's what he told me. And that's what you're telling me.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what we saw. I mean, we were going and trying to drive into it because I wanted to find out where this narrative is coming from, and I didn't find any evidence at all of it, you know? And that's when I was like, okay, well, you know, some of the contacts I had, I was like, can you set me up with, you know, the head of your cyber command and the head of your intelligence service, because I want to know, like, what is your assessment of where this information is coming from? And it's absolutely being amplified by the Russians, right? Like, because they know if they can divide, government here for military aid, that they may have a chance of being successful.
It's so easy for them. Like, I'm not sure who comes up with the propaganda ideas first. Is it like our own like kind of trolls on Twitter? And I think they're looking at that very closely and being like, yes, let's pull that string. Right. Like, maybe they're smart enough to think of it on their own. It ain't rocket science, so either side could think of it. The point is that it ends up coalescing quite nicely and in favor of the Russians, which is really problematic. I mean, like the biolab conspiracy is another one where it's like, guys, like, this has been on our embassy website forever. This isn't a conspiracy. These are just like it's okay to have labs around the world, and it's especially okay when the U.S. is involved with them. The whole point of being involved with them is to make sure they're not doing anything shady.
Well, yeah,
that's why we're there.
And you know, like I think to kind of, you know, I know our time's kind of running out now, but like to end on, you know, like, we're talking about some of the corruption within, you know, the humanitarian aid side of the house, right? I have seen and worked alongside of, you know, two strictly humanitarian nonprofits, which is a little different than, you know, what the Special Operations Association of America is doing there. But, you know, Save Our Allies was doing amazing work. Obviously, you mentioned Tim. And then Ukraine Rises, Jessica Blazer, they are doing some amazing work as far as building projects and things of that nature, you know. So
and the reason I would say for Save Our Allies, the reason you can be more sure of that is because, like, they control the supply lines.
Correct.
Which is like nobody else can, because they have these like spec ops guys who are actually doing it, and they've got a system in place that's really impressive. You know, most nonprofits, you're right. It's probably just going to Poland and they're like, okay, hope for the best.
Right.
You know, and then, you know, I'm sure a lot of it, and some of it's too is, it's just hard to get to the areas that need it because it's dangerous.
It's super dangerous,
and
right?
So that has something to do with it.
Yeah, and you have to have a risk tolerance, and you have to be spun up on security, and look, we're doing some very cool advisement there, but it's all done and pre-coordinated with State Department and DoD, right? We never want I don't advise any. We don't encourage any U.S. Veterans to go over there and fight, right? Because the last thing we want to do, from our capacity is get in the way of something that is a strategic mission when we're trying to affect something tactically and get sideways with it,
Yeah. And I'll say when I was there, we went on a little, we toured a lot of the neighborhoods just outside Kyiv that were bombed out by Russian forces. And these are lower middle class neighborhoods that they don't have anywhere to go. They're not. They couldn't get a flight out, right. Because you see some richer neighborhoods and they're just empty. But these neighborhoods that were bombed out, and what you see there looked very much to me like everything I saw, kind of post Hurricane Harvey, let's say in Houston, right? Where it's
a really good.
It looks exactly the same.
Yeah.
Like you've got, in the sense of you've got a big high school gym that is packed with supplies, and you've got some old ladies in there, kind of going through it, just inventorying it and getting it out to people. People are in line. They're not killing each other. They're in line.
Right.
They're normal people.
They're just in line.
And so it makes me mad that there was kind of this vilification of them and Zelensky in our own kind of, Twitter spheres.
Oh, it's horrible. It's
Twitter
absolutely
spheres.
horrible.
So I'm it's just not true. Do you think they staged it for us? Do you think they had a bunch of actors just staging what I saw? You think, what the hell?
I mean, I never thought.
And people are listening yes, exactly.
A westernized, European city, I would see bread lines, electricity issues. I mean, and that's the thing. We're getting into winter, and it's really starting to take its toll. The thing is Ukrainians on their own, they don't have enough to completely push Russia back. Right. They need our support. They need the international community's support, right?
Yeah.
And I am firmly committed to that. And it's the same with Russia, right? They need the support of their
apparently Iran,
right? Exactly.
They're that desperate. What's your opinion on this? It's probably not true, but there would be a theory out there that this recent arms dealer, the Merchant of Death, as he's called, the Russians have been pushing for him for a while. But one thing that worries me is did they need him in his contacts? Did they need him in his contacts because they need that much more weapons right now? Did we just facilitate some more weapons that can push us back on the battlefield?
Some of the estimates that I've heard recently from contacts within DoD, and a few people from think tanks is that they estimate the munition burn rate in Ukraine is greater than it was during the height of World War II.
That's crazy.
In some areas when it comes to the artillery shelling and stuff that's going on, right? And so they've
been stockpiling a lot for 70 years in the Soviet Union, I suppose. But
so they're depleting that, right? They are going to need to figure out a way to replenish.
They don't have this crazy industrial base.
No, they don't.
They
don't have I think in terms of a war of attrition, I think we have a longer, more stamina, right?
Well, we should. I mean, political stamina we have very little, of course, just as a whole, but materially speaking, this is not a hard one, and you got to put it in a that's my job, right? As a politician, we got to put it into context for people. That's why I say, look, it's so far 2-3% of our annual not our annual expenditures. I'm just defense, just defense, and people don't quite realize that. I think they're told other things. I've heard some crazy numbers thrown out there about how much we've given Ukraine. It's just totally untrue. It's 80 billion was a number, 70, 80 billion. I'm that's false.
That's not even true.
That is not true at all. But it's working. I also point out to people this is a good investment for a variety of reasons. If we had totally let Ukraine fall, and said, look, we just don't get involved in such things, I would almost guarantee that China would be encircling Taiwan right now.
Oh,
like they're watching this closely, and they've got a stopwatch, and they're like, what's their time? Yep. How long does it take for them to give up? Like that's what the Chinese are looking at right now. You will, ironically, by not asserting that aggressive posture right away, you're inviting aggression that probably leads you into the fight that you're so afraid of in the first place. Mm-hmm. And somebody like Donald Trump, the weird thing about this sort of like America First movement, or what they claim to be America First, is that it's so anti-Trump. Trump didn't think this way. Trump had the instinct correct, which was like, you know what? I'm going to tell you that I'm going to bomb the shit out of you if you don't do this, right? And he had his instincts were right, and people were like, I think he's serious, and he understood deterrence, I think, in a very basic way that the people who claimed to have supported him, I don't seem to, which makes me confused.
Well, I mean, deterrence is an important thing. I 100% agree with you. If we had done nothing, not only would China be circling Taiwan closer than they are, but I don't think Russia was ever going to stop in Ukraine.
Oh, no,
right?
I don't think
If
so.
you look at the historical imperatives, right, if you study the problem set of war in that country from an analyst perspective, there are 11 corridors that are able to have a battalion-sized element invade Russia historically, right? Mm-hmm. They owned 7 of them prior to the invasion. By invading and taking over all of Ukraine, they would have owned 9. That leaves 2 more. They were never done.
Yeah.
And unlike China that has, global hegemonic aspirations, Russia just wants to be left alone. They want, and Putin has publicized what he is going to do. It's not a surprise.
Yeah, he's saber rattled quite a bit on these other countries,
and people
which
just
will
don't
draw us
believe
into
him.
Yeah, I don't know why.
I'm going to do this.
Yeah, I'm going to invade Georgia. I'm going to invade Ukraine. No, he's not going to do it.
It's like
Latvia's ours too, and so you know what I mean. It's in Finland, and it's like at what point do you take him seriously? You got to take him serious. Yeah, let's characterize that. Yeah, he wants to be left alone, but after he's taken all of the territory.
Yeah.
that he wants. Yeah, he doesn't want South America necessarily, but I don't know. He's pretty in tight with the Venezuelans at the moment. He actually, you never know. So, yeah. It's a good conversation on Ukraine. I think we. Thanks for coming on and talking about that, because that's a question that really appreciate that got brought up a lot. I think we'll probably headline the podcast with that particular dissection, because it's not something we've talked about a whole lot. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for coming on.